Alright, we are recording. Just finished with the introduction in iRobot. Not very long of an introduction. And as I was saying in the previous video, it's kind of more of a prologue, I think. To me, a prologue exists within the story. An introduction doesn't have to. But this is within the story itself. But it is an introduction to what's going on, because this is a framed story. Excuse me. Actually, I'm not even sure. Did we get the guy's name? Have a guy from some press agency uh, who wants to write a piece on Dr. Susan Calvin, who it even points out that her and US Robotics, the main company that makes these robots, are basically synonymous. She's been so impactful on it over her professional career, and she is now retiring. So it's like it's the end of an era. Um, so it is being introduced with all that information. So it is still an introduction to the story, but I personally wouldn't necessarily label this an introduction, but as a prologue. But that's me. That's me. Um, I do feel like mentioning a couple things quickly. One is trying to do those notes on this is not the easiest. It would have been nice if I could have, still written something out and then have it convert that, or have it be able to pop up, like to add a note and then just scribble in there. No, no. If you pop up to add a note, you have to type in. That's a little disappointing. But it still is. The highlights are nice. So what I'm thinking I might end up doing going forward is highlight and then write just on the laptop directly. This also means when I get to doing editing of my own books, if I put it on here as an ebook versus a PDF, I may end up having to do something like that where I highlight it. And I can set the color, because that's one nice thing with it being a Libre color. I could set the color for, it's like, okay, this I need to delete, that I need to rewrite, or whatever. We'll see. But I do wish I could just handwrite it. Anyhow, going back to how the framing is going here, because it is this introduction is from the point of view of the journalist. It is giving us how he basically doesn't know anything more about her than what you'd find in an encyclopedia, which is interesting for a couple of reasons. One is just how it's being described. I really like how Asimov has actually written this, but it's also because he is interested, because he is curious. That curiosity rubs off on me, rubs off on the reader. That it's like, well, he wants to know more, well, now I want to know more as well. So that's a very effective means of writing that. I do like that. Then we get to the actual description of her, which we do actually meet her, but it's on the next page. Next page flip on this thing. She was a frost. This is describing her when she was 20, I believe. She was a frosty girl, plain and colorless, who protected herself against a world she disliked by a mask-like expression and a hypertrophy, probably pronouncing it incorrectly, of intellect. But as she watched and listened, she felt the stirrings of a cold enthusiasm. So just explain the hypertrophy. That would be the opposite of atrophy. I actually did need to look at that. It is nice having the built-in dictionary. Because, it's a few words actually where Asimov was using those where I wasn't familiar with them. So that's also a nice thing about ebooks. But yeah, hypertrophy, opposite of atrophy, where it is something has been enlarged. So she has a very enlarged intellect. So it being set up that she is not necessarily the most attractive woman, but is very intelligent. She also doesn't really like the world, so she just kind of cuts it off by refusing to have an expression for it. Which is quite an interesting... Okay, yeah. Quite an interesting description. As I typed into my notes here, it also makes her seem inhuman or lacking in humanity. How she doesn't seem to be interested in connecting with other people, that she hides that, and she is just very intelligent. And shortly after this... shortly after this, it talks about how she, despite her youth, is able to, sit down and just draw out positronic brains so skillfully that they're deterministic. That, oh, you want this function here? Okay, she will draw it out, and it will perform the function as desired exactly. So, you know what the outcome is that you want, given certain inputs, you will get that output. Because it is reasonable that it is something that could be different, especially when you do have something like this that is trying to impersonate the way a brain works, because our brains are variable. We will get the same inputs and sometimes get different outputs, at least as far as our thoughts are concerned. That's after a different thing that I want to read off. All that had been done... Well, she obtained her bachelor's degree at Columbia in 2003 and began graduate work in cybernetics. All that had been done in the mid-20th century... Oh, okay, sorry. I wasn't fully seeing the context of the sentences. I'm trying to reread it now. All that had been done in the mid-20th century on calculating machines had been upset by Robertson and his positronic brain paths. Okay, so right there, nothing too unusual. The miles of relays and photocells had given way to the spongy globe of platinum iridium about the size of a human brain. This is some amount of jargon. And typically I'm against jargon, but I mean, there are times it is appropriate. This is certainly one of those times, because even though there is jargon here, so it's like, what is it talking about, platinum iridium? Yeah, that's irrelevant, because it's given context here. That's talking about how we had these machines, these other calculating machines, that used miles of relays and photocells, that now this platinum iridium, whatever that is, has replaced it, and it's something the size of the human brain. So, and it's a spongy globe as well, so it's even something resembling a human brain. So, yeah, jargon, but context is given straight away, such that it doesn't really matter what the jargon is. He could have completely made up a word, now to use something that you could recognize as, oh, platinum and iridium are two metals. It's like, you can recognize that. It could be something unrecognizable. You'd still have the context here. Okay. Just want to see, was there... Need to fix that typo. As we continue on, we get this. For 50 years, I doubt I will be reading straight out of it as much going forward, but it also depends because of how easy it is to highlight. For 50 years, she watched the direction of human progress change and leap ahead. Now she was retiring as much as she ever could. At least she was allowing someone else's name to be inset upon the door of her office. So again, we're getting this nice means of describing her in two ways. One is that she has been present through so much. In fact, she even calls out later, how old are you? So you've never been in a world without robots. Which is a feeling I can relate to, because I can still remember in high school was the first time I used the internet for a school project. It's not to say well, I guess you could say I am older than the consumer internet. The internet is still older than me. But it's like before that, what was I using? Textbooks, library books of other kinds, and encyclopedias. I could probably still do that, though it has been a while. But it is definitely, I've seen the erosion of various things, such as just learning things as opposed to learning just how to find things, because those are very different. And not to suggest on its own that one is better than the other. In some ways, knowing how to find things can be better than just knowing what everything is. Kind of like how knowing how to efficiently use a calculator in some ways is equal to knowing how to do the math yourself. It all depends. That it's a complex calculator, but it's just a scientific calculator, not a graphing calculator. Those I have over there. I ended up using that for doing all my calculus and such. I had a calculator capable of doing the calculus for me, but I was so good at it that that calculator worked fine. But no, one issue though with that trend towards learning theory, how to look things up instead of just learning the things themselves, or having to go through encyclopedia, for example, knowing what to look up in there and knowing how to digest it. There is a stark difference in that one, it requires you to learn it, to take in all the information and figure out what you need from it, while the other can be, okay, how can I most efficiently, most effectively get to the answer? Which doesn't mean that you understand the answer. And it's also, you may find that, well, you may not find, rather, that what you're looking at is wrong. That is something that does also happen. Internet hoaxes, per se, it's like the whole, a lie can travel around the world faster than the truth can get its boots on kind of thing as well. And there have been things. I'm just trying to remember. I think it's pretty sure it's the case. But one thing with hopefully that got picked up. Cracking knuckles. Technically, that's not what happened there, but that is. I remember seeing something years ago that it had actually been debunked, a description for it, but whenever you would look something up about cracking knuckles, like, does it cause arthritis? Is it this that's happening, or that's it? Things like that. It had been debunked, but whenever you search for it, it was the first thing that came up. So it became the truth, not because it was true, but because that's what everyone believed it was. And that is one issue to the whole just non-critically knowing how to look things up as opposed to having to learn it yourself. And in a way, as I said, I can kind of relate to her, this idea that you grew up in a world that has all these robots. This means that you grew up in a world where more advanced calculations potentially you don't have to do because the robots do them, or also certain labor you don't know how to do at all. You're reliant on the robots then, and there's some things that are valuable to know how to do on your own. Okay. I mean, not to say that a robot couldn't help you, but it's still, it's like, what happens if the robot isn't there, if the robot fails or whatever, you got problems. So as the conversation continues, we now get more of an introduction for her, with her character and her actually talking, because he's talking about how the whole you are basically synonymous with U.S. robotics, with U.S. robotics. She's like, oh, so you want the human interest angle? That's right. Human interest out of a robot, a contradiction. No, doctor, out of you. Well, I've been called a robot myself. Surely they've told you I'm not human. So this is, again, fairly interesting for her character because of how it is continuing the whole she's not completely human, she doesn't really connect with humanity that well. It continues with that, but it's also her herself parroting this. And she's the one that brings it up. Sort of like, she's agreeing with it. Which isn't necessarily true. I mean, personally, if a situation like that, I would probably be offended to a certain degree. I would find it insulting because of how it is dehumanizing, and it does serve to cut me off from other people. Now, true, that's potentially what she wants, but still is kind of disappointing, where it's, like, I am human. Please don't forget that, even if I don't always seem like it. But it's like that is telling you about her character quite a bit, and it's so efficient. It's so efficient. Like, yeah, hang on. It's... Okay. Thought it was I'm not sure where it is that I put in my notes, but basically, what Asimov is demonstrating here in this introduction, that's pretty short. I've only got one note left, and it's just kind of a funny one. Is it's got very sharp writing, in that it's like in just a few sentences, her character is being so efficiently described by her by how she's speaking, and that you can just dig in and discuss her character just from these 3 sentences. It's really, really neat and really awesome to see, because, man, that's not always easy. True, in some cases, for me, a character doesn't even necessarily crystallize in my mind until a while later. That's one thing why editing and revising is good. One reason for that. So, I mean, I don't know how much he may have worked on this, but it's still, I mean, there were some other books I've read where, who is this character? It's like I still don't necessarily have a sense here, and here it's so clear that, and it's conveyed so rapidly. Yeah, I mean, or it's also with some characters where, I'm trying to think of how to put it. Not that the characters don't develop, because I'm just thinking like with Anakin, the prequel trilogy, since I went through that so recently. Especially in Revenge of the Sith, it's yes, he does develop, but it doesn't feel right. Because of how he. It's annoying. So I just noticed a typo on the computer here, so I actually can't stop that so I can fix it. I'll do that later. It's just I'm gonna stop it. Those. But it's with him. Now, true, some of it was how he had developed in previous stories. I wanted him to develop a certain way. I wanted certain things to happen that didn't happen. So some of it was frustration there, but there was also just the whole. I didn't feel it was going. That it necessarily made sense as motivations were clearly conveyed throughout. So his character, though there was development there, the development itself didn't seem clear. That you weren't getting that sense of it, or there were times when his character fluctuated back and forth a lot, and like very inconsistent. Here, now, true, we are going to see more of her later on, but still, you're getting such a clear introduction to the character that it would be shocking to see her disagree with that, to ever be inconsistent with it, because Asimov clearly has a strong concept of who she is and the kind of character she is. So, yeah, I mean, it's like for that to suddenly change would be like, whoa, how'd that happen? So, yeah, I mean, it is very refreshing to read it. I mean, and I knew I've been wanting to reread this book for a while anyway. Doing it with this and doing it after the prequel trilogy, that was so disappointing and so frustrating. It's like, it's just worked out perfectly because Asimov is such a good writer, at least for some of these stories. Of the 5 I've got, there's one that I don't care for and one that genuinely I don't think is very good. But one thing that makes me feel better is I once saw somebody say, yeah, he tried to write a detective story and it didn't work out that well. It's like, yep. That is a relief to me because, like, yeah, he tried something new, didn't quite work, and okay, so I don't feel bad about the whole saying I don't like it. The last thing here, and it's just kind of funny because as I'm pretty sure I'd already given one date with this, technically some of these events would have already happened. Not her time, but that would still be in the future. But the interplanetary press reaches the entire solar system. Potential audience is 3 billion. Your estimate was off, Asimov, by quite a bit. Granted, I am interpreting that as potential audience is the whole of the human population within the solar system. Not just those that are already reading. Because you wouldn't say potential audience, you would say the audience is 3 billion if it's just your readership. So, yeah. And it is, to be fair, this guy is probably one who would see it as, especially getting this kind of story, because she is so important. It would make sense that he would see it as everyone wants to read this story, that I get the opportunity to write. So yeah, I could see it being that way. Yeah, relatively short introduction, but very effective, I think. And then we're gonna get into the next story, which is Robbie. Robbie the robot, yes, but I mean it makes sense. It makes sense. In fact, this does end setting up that one, which is and this is also a little interesting because this is before her time. I heard about it later, and when they called us blasphemers and demon creators, I always thought of him. Robbie was a non-vocal robot. He couldn't speak. He was made and sold in 1996. Those were the days before extreme specialization, so he was sold as a nursemaid. As a what? As a nursemaid. By the way, one thing I want to add about this, because one criticism that I gave at the end of Revenge of the Sith is to the idea that 3PO wouldn't be able to lift Padme. And it's like, no, it is reasonable that because of his role as a protocol droid, he's around people, potentially people who would be ill at times. His inability to lift a human is actually inconsistent. He should be capable of doing so. That should be part of his that should be a reasonable expectation for his function. Robbie, because I do remember this story, described as a nursemaid. Yeah, at one point, towards the end of this specific story, was put into a factory, and actually is able to knock away a falling thing that's like 500 pounds. It's like, he's actually very powerful. Is a tremendously powerful robot. Non-vocal, sure. So in that way, 3PO has him beat. But this Robbie could probably rip the arms off Chewbacca if he lost in a game. I mean, yeah. Robbie makes more sense for that design, because even as a nursemaid, there's still reasons that you would need physical strength. So yeah. But I think it is also, you can argue that, well, Robbie was, as he's described, not specialized, so it's like, would need to be able to work in a factory just as be able to work in a nursemaid way. You may not need the strength, but still you would expect some degree of strength that 3PO should have had, but don't need to keep on about that. Yeah, I can stop it here and get to the next one, and I'm going to keep thinking how I want to do some of the note-taking. I am thinking I will do highlight on here, right, and I'll just go back and forth as this goes, and then when I am talking about it, I can do the highlights to move around more easily and read off the notes. So we'll see if that works. Still figuring things out. But hey, lots of fun, because I mean, it's Asimov. I love science fiction. I have a love for Isaac Asimov then, and it is legitimately a good story, or a collection of stories, depending on how you want to look at it. In any case, see you next time.